Some moments split your life into two parts, before and after. For me, that moment came on a rainy Thursday when I was 47 years old, standing in my kitchen with muddy hands and a heart I didn't even know was breaking. If you saw me at the grocery store, you'd forget me before you reached the next aisle. I'm that kind of woman, quiet, polite, always carrying a neat little list and following it exactly. I wear sensible shoes and keep my hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. I'm the dependable type, the one who packs lunches every morning, pays bills 3 days early, and never, ever forgets a birthday or anniversary. For 22 years of marriage, love meant loyalty to me. Love was stability. Love was a warm hand to hold in bed at night and someone to share the newspaper with over coffee each morning. I never looked for fireworks or passion or any of those things you see in movies. I thought I didn't need them. I thought what Frank and I had was enough. But what happened that Thursday afternoon changed everything I thought I knew about myself. It shook something loose inside me that I didn't even realize had been stuck there, buried under years of routine and quiet contentment. I've never been the same person since that day. I need to tell you this story because I never thought something like this could happen to someone like me. Please don't make the same mistake I did. Don't think you're too ordinary, too settled, too comfortable in your life for it to suddenly turn upside down. It started on that rainy Thursday afternoon in late September. I remember the exact day because I had just come inside from my garden, frustrated and disappointed. I'd spent months nurturing my tomato plants, talking to them each morning as I watered them, watching them grow tall and green and full of promise. But now, after 3 days of heavy rain, they were soggy and drooping, their leaves turning yellow at the edges. All that careful work, all those mornings checking on them, it felt wasted. The house smelled like the cinnamon candle I'd lit earlier, mixed with the earthy scent of rain that clung to my clothes. It was a comforting smell, warm and familiar, though I hadn't really noticed it before that moment. Funny how you can live somewhere for years and suddenly smell it like you're experiencing it for the first time. I wiped my muddy hands on the old dish towel hanging by the sink, the one with tiny blue flowers that my mother had given me years ago. I was reaching for the kettle, planning to make myself a cup of chamomile tea and maybe read a few pages of the book I'd been working through, when the doorbell rang. The sound startled me. We don't get many visitors, especially not without calling. First, our friends always phone ahead, and the mailman just leaves packages on the porch. My first thought was that it must be a delivery, maybe the new garden gloves I'd ordered online, or perhaps something for Frank. I dried my hands quickly and walked to the front door, smoothing my hair as I went. When I looked through the peephole, I saw a man standing on our porch, but I couldn't quite make out who it was through the distorted glass. He was tall, holding something under his arm, and his hair looked wet from the rain. When I opened the door, I recognized him immediately. It was Aaron, Frank's co-worker from the accounting firm. We'd met several times over the years at company functions, those holiday dinners where everyone tries too hard to be cheerful, the summer barbecue where I always ended up by the potato salad making small talk with the other wives while our husbands gathered around the grill talking about work and sports. Aaron had always seemed different from the other men Frank worked with. Not younger in age, he was probably in his late 40s or early 50s, with gray threading through his dark hair, but younger in spirit somehow. More present, more aware. When he talked to you at those parties, he actually looked at you, really listened to what you were saying instead of glancing over your shoulder to see who else was in the room. But today he looked different. His usually neat shirt was half soaked from the rain, and water dripped from his hair onto his collar. He held a manila envelope under one arm, clutching it against his chest like it contained something precious or fragile. His eyes, which were usually calm and friendly, looked worried, almost anxious. "Hi, June," he said, and his voice sounded a little breathless, like he'd been walking fast, or maybe running. "I'm sorry to just show up like this without calling. Is Frank home?" I blinked, surprised to hear my name. Most of Frank's co-workers called me Mrs. Patterson, if they called me anything at all. Hearing my first name in Aaron's voice made something flutter in my chest, not unpleasant, just unexpected. "No, he's still at the office," I said, checking my watch. It was only 3:30 in the afternoon. "Is everything okay? Did something happen at work?" Aaron hesitated, and in that tiny pause, I could feel something hanging in the air between us, something unspoken and heavy. He shifted the envelope from one arm to the other and gave me a tight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's nothing urgent," he said, shaking his head. "I just needed to drop this off for him. I can leave it with you if that's all right." He held out the envelope, and I could see that his hands were slightly shaking, though whether from cold or nerves, I couldn't tell. I reached for the envelope, but as my fingers almost touched it, something made me pause. Maybe it was the way he looked soaked and worried and somehow vulnerable standing there on my porch. Maybe it was the loneliness I'd been carrying around without even admitting it to myself. Or maybe it was just basic human kindness. "Do you want to come in?" I asked. "You're absolutely soaked. You'll catch pneumonia standing out there in this weather." He hesitated again, and I could see him weighing the decision in his mind. Then he nodded, a real smile finally reaching his eyes. "Thanks," he said. "That would be great. I don't want to drip all over your floors though. Don't worry about the floors," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "They've seen worse." As soon as Aaron walked into our house, something shifted. The silence that usually felt comfortable and familiar suddenly felt different, more aware somehow, like the walls themselves were paying attention. I don't know why his presence changed the feeling of the space so much. Maybe it was because he didn't just enter the room like most people do. He seemed to settle into it, to really see it and appreciate it. I led him through the living room toward the kitchen, noticing how he glanced at the family photos on the mantel, the book stacked on the coffee table, the way the afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains my grandmother had made. It made me see my own home through fresh eyes, and I felt a little proud of how warm and welcoming it looked. "Your house is lovely," he said as we walked into the kitchen. "It feels like a real home, you know? Lived in and loved." I felt my cheeks warm at the compliment. "Thank you. Let me get you a towel." I pulled a clean towel from the linen closet and handed it to him. He took it with another quiet thanks and began dabbing at his hair and collar. His movements were careful and precise, and I found myself watching him, noticing small details I'd never paid attention to before: the way his hair curled slightly when it was wet, the small scar on his left hand, how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "I'll make some tea," I said, needing something to do with my hands. "It'll help warm you up." "That sounds perfect," he said. I busied myself with the tea, filling the kettle, getting out cups and saucers, arranging everything on a small tray. The familiar routine calmed me, but I was still very aware of Aaron sitting at my kitchen table, still very aware that this was unusual and somehow significant, though I couldn't say why. When the tea was ready, I poured it carefully and sat down across from him. The kitchen felt smaller with him in it, more intimate. Outside, the rain continued its steady tapping against the window panes, creating a cocoon of sound around us. We sat quietly for a few minutes, both of us sipping our tea. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but it was full of something: anticipation, maybe, or possibility. I kept stealing glances at him over my cup, wondering what had really brought him here, what was in that envelope, why he looked so worried. Finally, he set down his cup and looked at me directly. "You know," he said, "Frank talks about you a lot at work." I glanced up, startled. "He does?" Aaron nodded, his expression serious now. "He says you're the reason he stays grounded. That you're the one person in his life who never lets him drift too far from who he really is, who keeps him anchored to what matters." I felt something flicker in my chest, not quite pride, not quite sadness, but something complicated that lived somewhere between the two. It was nice to hear, but it also made me feel like I was being described as an anchor, something heavy that holds things down rather than something that lifts them up. "That's kind of him to say," I replied, not sure what else to offer. Aaron looked at me for a long moment, not in that casual, passing way most people do when they're making conversation. He really looked at me, like he was trying to see something deeper, something beyond the surface. "Can I ask you something, June?" he said, and the way he said my name made something inside me go very still. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "What do you think makes a marriage last?" The question caught me completely off guard. It was so personal, so unexpected. I set down my teacup and thought about it, aware that he was waiting for a real answer, not just polite small talk. "I suppose trust," I said slowly, working through the thoughts as I spoke them. "Respect, habit maybe, shared history, love, if you're lucky enough to keep finding it after all the years pile up." Aaron tilted his head, considering my words. "Do you think it's possible for two people to outgrow each other, even if they love each other?" My breath caught. The question hit something deep inside me, something I'd been trying not to think about for months, maybe years. I didn't answer right away because the truth was, I had been asking myself that exact same question, quietly and privately, lying awake at night next to Frank, wondering if we were becoming strangers who just happened to share a house and a history. It wasn't that Frank and I didn't love each other anymore. We did, in our quiet, comfortable way. But sometimes it felt like we were two trains running on parallel tracks close to each other, familiar, but never really meeting anymore. Never really connecting in any meaningful way. I think, I said carefully, choosing my words like I was walking on thin ice, that people change as they get older. And sometimes they don't always change in the same direction or at the same pace. Sometimes they grow apart without meaning to. Aaron nodded slowly, understanding flickering in his eyes. He looked down at his hands, which were wrapped around his teacup. Frank and I had a conversation today, he said quietly. A difficult one. My stomach tightened. Is everything all right? Is he in some kind of trouble? Aaron looked up, and his eyes were darker now, sadder, but still calm and kind. I don't want to speak out of turn, and I hope you won't think I'm overstepping boundaries by telling you this, but I needed to see you, to talk to you directly. Why? I whispered. Because he said something today about you, and I couldn't let it sit in my chest without at least saying something to you face to face. My heart was beating faster now. What did he say? Aaron hesitated, and I could see him weighing his words, trying to decide how much to tell me. Finally, he leaned forward slightly, his voice lower now, more intimate. He said you've been lonely, Aaron said gently. He said he doesn't know how to fix it anymore, that he's scared you've stopped needing him. He's worried that you're slipping away from him, and he doesn't know how to reach you. The words hit me like a soft punch, not violent or cruel, just enough to knock all the air out of my lungs. I looked away, staring out at the rain-soaked garden, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't know what to say. Frank was right, of course. I had been lonely, though I'd been trying so hard not to admit it, even to myself. I'd been going through the motions of our life together, cooking dinner, doing laundry, watching television in the evenings, lying in bed reading while he fell asleep beside me, but feeling like I was slowly disappearing, becoming invisible even to myself. Aaron didn't push me to respond. He just let the silence settle between us, his hands still resting on the table, not reaching for mine but close enough that I could feel their warmth, their presence. The rain outside had started to slow, but inside me, something else had just begun, a recognition, maybe, or an awakening I wasn't ready to name. I don't remember exactly how long we sat there in that charged, quiet space. It might have been minutes or it might have been an hour. Time seemed to move differently with Aaron there, like it had thickened and slowed down to let us really feel each moment. When he finally stood to leave, I felt an ache. I couldn't quite identify loss, maybe, or longing, or just the sadness of watching someone walk out of your life when you're not sure you're ready for them to go. I walked him to the door, my fingers accidentally brushing against his as I handed him back the envelope he'd brought. The touch was brief, probably meaningless, but it sent a little shock through me that I felt all the way to my toes. He gave me a small smile, one that was gentle and understanding and didn't quite reach his eyes. Tell Frank I dropped this off, he said. I will, I nodded. And then he was gone, swallowed by the damp gray of the late afternoon, leaving me standing in my doorway with my heart beating too fast and my mind spinning with thoughts I didn't know how to organize. I stood there for several minutes after the door closed, listening to the silence of the house, which suddenly seemed louder and more overwhelming than it had been before. My tea had gone cold on the table, but I didn't bother to reheat it. I just sat back down in the same chair where Aaron had been sitting, staring out the window at my drooping tomato plants, my thoughts louder and more insistent than the rain. Frank came home late that night, around 8:30. I heard his car in the driveway, the familiar sound of his key in the lock, his tired footsteps in the hallway. He was exhausted, I could see it in the way he moved, slower than usual, like the weight of a long day still hung heavy on his shoulders. He kissed my cheek absently as he walked into the kitchen, the same quick, automatic kiss he'd been giving me for years. He loosened his tie and began pulling papers out of his briefcase, already mentally preparing for tomorrow's work. There's something from Aaron on the counter, I said, watching him carefully. Frank glanced at the envelope and nodded. Right. He mentioned he might stop by. He looked at me then, something flickering across his face. Did he seem okay to you? The question surprised me. What do you mean? Frank shrugged, but there was something worried in his expression. I don't know. He seemed different today. Distracted, maybe, like something was bothering him. I thought about Aaron sitting at my kitchen table, the way he'd looked at me, the questions he'd asked, the things he'd told me about Frank's concerns. He seemed fine, I said. Just wet from the rain. Frank nodded, but I could tell there was something more he wanted to say, something he was holding back. Instead, he just opened the refrigerator and stared into it like he was looking for answers instead of food. I watched him quietly, really watched him for the first time in months. His shirt collar was wrinkled from the long day, and there were small food stains on his tie that he hadn't noticed. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled out his phone and began scrolling through work emails, even though he was home and no one would expect him to respond until morning. When had he started looking so tired all the time? When had the lines around his eyes gotten so deep? When had we stopped really talking to each other about anything that mattered? Frank, I said gently, setting down the book I'd been pretending to read. Can I ask you something? He looked up from his phone, surprised by the serious tone in my voice. Of course. Do you think I've changed? The question hung in the air between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we wanted to cross. He blinked slowly, clearly caught off guard. What do you mean? I mean over the years, since we first got married. Do you think I'm different than the woman you fell in love with? Frank put down his phone and really looked at me for the first time in what felt like weeks. Of course you've changed, he said slowly. We both have. It's been 22 years, June. People grow and change. That's normal. But have we changed together? I asked, the words coming out smaller than I'd intended. Or have we just changed? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he ran a hand through his graying hair and sighed, the sound heavy with exhaustion and something else, sadness, maybe, or resignation. Sometimes, he said quietly, I don't know how to reach you anymore. You're still here, still in this house, still going through all the same routines we've always had, but you feel far away from me, like you're thinking about things I don't know about, living in parts of yourself I can't access. I swallowed hard, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. I could say the same thing about you. We looked at each other across the kitchen, and for a moment, I could see the young man I'd married all those years ago, the one who used to stay up all night talking to me about his dreams and fears and hopes for our future. I wondered if he could still see the young woman I used to be, the one who believed that love would always be enough to bridge any distance between us. We didn't talk much more that night. We went through our usual evening routine, brushing our teeth side by side at the bathroom sink, changing into our pajamas, climbing into bed with our separate books and reading lights. We lay there shoulder to shoulder but feeling miles apart, both of us pretending to read while our minds churned with all the things we weren't saying to each other. As I listened to Frank's breathing slow and deepen as he fell asleep, I stared at the ceiling and thought about Aaron's visit, about the questions he'd asked, about the loneliness Frank had noticed but didn't know how to fix. I thought about the woman I used to be and the woman I was becoming, and I wondered if it was possible to find your way back to someone you'd grown apart from, or if some distances were too great to cross. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, but inside me, the storm was just beginning. I kept thinking about what Aaron had said, not just the words, but the look in his eyes, the way he had seen me, really seen me. The next few days passed quietly. Frank buried himself in work. I kept myself busy, folding laundry, watering plants, running errands. But in every quiet moment, Aaron lingered in my thoughts. I didn't expect to see him again so soon. It was Sunday afternoon and I was at the farmer's market just outside of town. I go there every week. There's a woman who sells handmade soap that I like, and the man at the honey stand always gives me a discount. Bakose bought from him once when he was just starting out. I was picking through bunches of late summer dolls when I heard someone say my name, June. I turned. It was Aaron. He wasn't in office clothes. This time just jeans and a navy pullover, sleeves pushed up, sunglasses perched on his head. He looked relaxed, different. Oh hey, I said, surprised, didn't expect to see ya here. He smiled. I live a few blocks away, come here sometimes for the bread. Wested there for a moment, not quite knowing what to say. Then I held up the flowers in my hand. These caught my eye. These suit you, he said. That stopped me. I didn't know why, maybe because it had been so long since someone said something like that without it being about practicality or route. And thanks, I said quietly. Walked a bit together. After that, browsed the stalls, talked about silly things, how overpriced the organic beaches were, how the kettle corn stand always drew the biggest crowd. It was easy comfortable. Then, standing by the edge of the market, near a bench under a tree, he turned to me and said, "June, I wasn't honest the other day." I felt my heart steer. "What do you mean?" "I didn't just stop by to drop off paperwork. I needed to talk to you alone because something's been weighing on me." There was a pause. "A shift in the area. I've been working with Frank for 8 years," she said. "And I respect him, but I see things. Things he doesn't, or maybe things he chooses not to." "I didn't move. Didn't breathe. You deserve more than being seen as dependable," he said, voice soft now. "You'd serve to feel alive." His words hit something deep inside me, something tender I hadn't touched in years. I should have walked away, but instead I asked, "Why are he saying this to me?" Aaron looked at me with a quiet intensity. "Basis, I care about you more than Ishold. And I think maybe you feel it, too." He didn't respond. I couldn't, because part of me wanted to run, and part of me didn't want to leave. That moment behind the drive home from the market felt longer than usual. I remember gripping the steering wheel harder than I needed to, my knuckles pale against the leather. The dollars lay on the passenger seat beside me, their colors too vivid to live for the heaviness inside my chest. He didn't turn on the radio. I needed silence. I needed to hear my thoughts only. They weren't thoughts exactly, they were feelings, sensations, a thrum in my chest, an ache in my ribs, echo of Aaron's words ringing louder than anything else. "You deserve to feel alive." That evening I didn't tell Frank I'd run into Aaron. I cooked dinner, lemon chicken with roasted potatoes, the kind he liked. We ate quietly the way we always did. We asked each other about our days, not to discover something new, but to maintain the rhythm. Afterward, he went to the den to watch news. I cleaned the kitchen slowly, methodically, as though if I scrubbed hard enough, I could rinse the heat from my skin, but I couldn't. Later that night, I sat alone on the back porch. A soft breeze lifted the edges off me night cone, and the sound of crickets filled the quiet. I wrapped my arms around myself, not from cold, but from a weight I didn't know how to carry. Had I really been lonely this long? Had I really buried parts of myself so deep that someone else could find them before I even realized they were missing? And we did it feel so good and so terrifying to be seen. The next morning I found myself checking me phone more than usual, hoping for a message, trading it to nothing came. But the next day it did. A short message, just "Will you meet me for coffee? Just to talk. I'll respect whatever you decide. Not for sure, no games." Just thought. He stared at it for what felt like an hour, then I replied, "Tomorrow, 10 o'clock a.m. the cafe near the library." I told myself it was closure, that it needed clarity, that I couldn't let a single moment uproot my entire life without facing it directly. But deep down, I think I already knew this wasn't about clarity, it was about connection. We met the next morning. The cafe was quiet, tucked between a bookstore and a consignment shop, the kind of place with mismatched cares and handwritten chalkboard menus. He arrived early, already seated with a cup of black coffee. When Aaron walked in, he spotted me immediately and gave a small nod before joining me at the table. "Thank you for coming," he said. I folded my hands around the warm mug. "I didn't come for anything dramatic. I just needed to understand." He looked tired, or maybe just thoughtful. There was something softer about him than before. "I didn't plan this," he said. "I didn't come into your home thinking I feel anything more than professional respect." But when he looked at June, I saw someone who had built her life around other people's needs. And I couldn't stop thinking about what was left for you. I looked down. "You make it sound like I'm someone to be pied." No, admired, but also recognized. Edie took a slow breath. "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted. "Don't know what this is. It doesn't have to be anything. I just want you to know someone sees you." So my own listanced words sat between us, heavy, but not unwelcome. He reached out, then carefully, not assuming, his hand rested on the table, palm up. An invitation, not a demand. He looked at it, and I placed mine gently over his, not out of recklessness, not out of longing, but out of a quiet, undeniable truth. I had forgotten what it felt like to be touched with reverence. We sat like that for a long time, no one rushing us, no expectation, just a people bound by something delicate and unexpected. When we stood to leave, he walked me to my car. The air was warm, a soft breeze stirred the leaves above us. "I don't want to ruin your life," he said quietly. "You're not," I said, "but you might bear minding me to look at it." I didn't kiss him. He didn't ask me to, but something had shifted. Gently, permanently drove home in silence again. But this time it didn't feel empty. It felt full, like I'd opened a door inside myself I didn't even know was locked. I didn't sleep much. That night I lay beside Frank, listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing, the man I had built my life with, the man who had shared my triumphs, my losses, the years that crept by quicker than either of us expected. His hand brushed mine in the dark out off a bit more than tenderness still. I didn't pull away. How do you measure a lifetime of loyalty against one moment of awakening? Next morning, I made pancakesnet from a box, but from scratch, the way you used to. When the kids were still home, Frank came in. Surprise pancakes on a Monday? He asked with a sleepy smile. I shrugged. Felt like doing something different. He poured coffee and kissed the top of my head. For a brief second, I closed my eyes and let the warmth of it settle. But it wasn't the same. Not because he changed. Because I had later that afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and a penny. Didn't even know what I intended to write. Maybe nothing, but once the pen touched the page, the words came. I wrote about how I had built a good life. I wrote about how I had always been proud of being dependable, of being someone others could count on, but I also wrote about how that pride had turned into a shell, a shield, and how an unexpected visit had cracked it wide open. I wasn't falling in love with Aaron. It wasn't that. It was that he reminded me I still had something alive inside me, something I hadn't nurtured in decades. My thoughts, my feelings, my own voice. He saw it, and no, I couldn't unsee it either. That week, I invited Frank to take a walk with me. After dinner, we strolled through the park near our house, where the tree had just begun to turn and drop their first golden leaves. Talked about work. I listened, then stopped. Frank, I said, can I ask you something? Hennessy looked at me, cautious. Of course. You ever miss who we used to be? He asked, his jaw tightening just slightly all the time. Then why did we stop trying? He looked away toward the lake. Thus her face shimmered like glass in the fitting light. Think we got comfortable, he said. We stopped asking questions, stopped seeing each other. I didn't know how to fix it without hurting you. You didn't hurt me, I said quietly. You just stopped noticing me. You turned to face me, then really looked at me. I'm noticing nothing shifted between us. Small betrayal. A moment of honesty that neither of us had made room for in a long time. We didn't fix everything in that walk, but it was the first time in years we walked side by side and actually fell together. A few days later, I saw Aaron again at the market. We locked eyes from across the flower stand. He gave a small smile. I returned it when he approached. He didn't reach for me. He didn't ask for anything. He just said, you look lighter. He nodded. I think I am. There was a pause. Are you okay? He asked. Yes, I said, because I'm finally choosing to be. We talked for a few minutes, then parted. No drama, no lingering promises, just a quiet understanding that what we shared had been real and necessary. Beauty had also been a moment a mirror needed. I drove home with a bouquet of dollars in the passenger seat, and when I walked through the front door, Frank was waiting, not just physically, but emotionally present in a way I hadn't seen in years. Took the flowers from my hand. These are your favorites, I said, smiling. They remind me of something I almost forgot. Didn't ask what, but later, over coffee, I told him. Not everything, but now and we began slowly, carefully, to meet each other again, not as who we had been, but as who we were now. Two people still learning how to love each other even after all this time. And for the first time in years, it felt like my voice belonged to me.